Hey, so last week I did a blog where I explained integration, and today I'm going to do a PowerPoint where I explain it just to go over what I described before, but with the video so people can have a better understanding, because it's really important that we understand what integration is. I'm coming from a framework of interpersonal neurobiology, and some might hear me refer to it as relational neuroscience as well. So that's the background so everyone can know. And I'm going to go over integration again today, and I recommend seeing the last video I did last week. But basically integration, the definition of integration is health. And this model is so profound that when you look at every brain imaging study of individuals with major psychiatric challenges, it reveals impaired integration in the brain. That's a quote from Dr. Dan Siegel. I mentioned it in my Neuroscience of Dating book. So what that means is someone with bipolar or with borderline personality disorder or schizophrenia, we know that there's certain parts of their brain that's not integrated. Like when children have trauma in childhood, they have impaired bilateral hemispheric integration because the corpus callosum, which is the bridge that links the two hemispheres, it shrinks, and the child will end up being a little more left brain or a little more right brain. They're not as integrated because in my last video, I talked about honoring differences and caring connections. If that child growing up is able to have a parent give them what's called a secure attachment, where they attune to the child and teach the child how to calm down their elephant, their limbic brain, so they then can access their ability to think about thinking called executive function, and they can work through intense emotions. If a child isn't taught that from another adult, what they do is they end up just relying on themselves inside, and their window of tolerance, given the right circumstance, they can still learn to have a certain level of integration because of help with teachers and other individuals if they don't get that from their parents. But we get wider and wider and wider windows of tolerance by having adults, when we're kids, show us this high differentiation, high linkage, having people honor differences but caringly connect. And so this is the model that we're coming from when we talk about the definition of health being integration. So again, that differentiation is really important, where you have enough space where you can know what is happening inside my own body with my interoception, with my beating heart. Let me think about all these emotional concepts that I have and try and figure out where I am on the map of life, different from someone else who's freaking out and having their emotional state. So that's the differentiation. And then the linkage is where you're not completely abandoned and totally alone and 100% self-absorbed. You are also aware that you're constantly connected with all of life. So we don't want to be too differentiated, because when you look at, and you've seen my definition of the mind, which is kind of that there's that coherent mind, and then there's an integrated brain, and there's empathic relationships, and that's the definition of optimal mental health. Our brain, because of mirror neurons, your brain is here. Your brain isn't just inside your head. It's actually relational because of the mirror neurons, and you're catching cues from other people. So your brain is constantly not just inside your own head, but being influenced by all kinds of stimuli outside. So that's the reason why this is important. I'm bringing it up is that we want to be differentiated, but we want to understand at a certain fundamental level that there's always a level of linkage happening in reality around us. So sort of being aware of that linkage, but not being consumed by it, is going to make us have wider windows of tolerance. So that's the definition of differentiation and linkage. I mentioned bilateral hemispheric last week. So you can see in this video, the corpus callosum, I mentioned that bridge between, this is just so you can see what I'm talking about, how that can have fewer integrative fibers when there's trauma in childhood. And also loving kindness meditation. A researcher at Naropa Institute in 2004 found that loving kindness meditation grows that corpus callosum. So it's true that trauma can shrink it, but then there are things we can do to grow it. And if you reach out to me by email, I have a kindness meditation that I like. And part of that is you actually can breathe. You can breathe kindness and blow it on yourself, and specifically blow that into your corpus callosum. It's a visualization. So the bilateral hemispheric is important to helping a person learn how to regulate their emotions. And so, but I talked about physical definition of integration and bilateral hemispheric being an example of that last week. Now we're going to talk about relationships. Relationships are about honoring differences and caring connections. And I mentioned last week that teenager breaking down, and if there's too much linkage, a teenager cries, and you're crying too. And if there's too much differentiation, you're like, grow up, and you leave. And the person, they don't ever learn how to self-regulate, how to self-soothe, how to calm down their elephant, and also be with another person. If you just leave, if you excessively differentiate. So there's a way that we all need to learn how to have our emotions, but also connect with someone else. And that's really the hardest part of achieving higher states of integration. And the more I think about this integration model, the more I think of it as like you're basically, I say the prefrontal cortex, or your rider, is the pilot of your life. And we're flying our airplane. And basically what's happening is we're having a certain amount of turbulence, which is this emotional arousal, emotional intensity. And it's like, how much turbulence can you take? If you have a real narrow window of tolerance, just a little bit of emotion just flips you into hyperarousal or hypoarousal, and you're on those riverbanks of rigidity and chaos. But if you have had a secure attachment, if you've had other adults teach you how to calm down, or as an adult, you can get what's called an earned secure attachment. If you can learn how to calm yourself down and continue to connect, then as you experience the inevitable turbulence of life, I call it the pain of living, and you're flying your airplane, you can manage that wind, you can manage that high emotional intensity, and really just enjoy the ride of life. So that's the idea, a real robust, it's called robust vagus nerve, and that's what high integration is. It's like you have a wide window of tolerance, and even when you experience high emotional intensity, you can manage it. And even it's normal that people get into hyperarousal, that they have like extreme anger or any kind of, depending on what happens, but they're able to move back into self-regulation and self-soothing, and they're able to access their higher functions quicker because of the wiring that they have from before. So this is the idea. The differentiation in the relationship means you allow the person to experience the pain of life, but you remain linked to help the person regain their balance, because it's important that we all feel connected. And this is just the idea. Too much linkage is codependency, and too little linkage is apathy. So we have this kind of, it's called the sweet spot. And then finally, we have this window of tolerance that I've been talking about, and I'll end this video on this. That sweet spot is being in your window of tolerance. And again, we can think of this as what integration is. And also, now that I've given that model, the prefrontal cortex being the pilot of your life, I'm going to show some more videos here. That's my class you can get where you can learn more about it, called Relational Neuroscience 101. But the prefrontal cortex, the medial prefrontal cortex here, it focuses attention, it delays response, it allocates resources. I call it like the pilot of your life. And this is what I was thinking, and there's like there's something called 9 functions of the prefrontal cortex. Do I not have them? I don't have them listed. Here they are, 9 functions of the prefrontal cortex. So these are all higher functions. If your elephant is taking you over, you don't have access as an executive function. You're just getting overwhelmed. But things like empathy, insight, which is like a mind map of me is insight. A mind map of you is empathy. Morality, a mind map of us is morality. Mind mapping is a higher function. If we're flooded with emotion, we can't go to these higher functions. So the only reason I wanted to bring all this up at the end of this video, vertical integration is making sense of those things. So sorry, that may have been too much information, but the only reason why is a wide window of tolerance, high level of integration, being able to be the pilot of your life and manage all that turbulence requires having those higher functions. And that's what a high state of integration is. So I'm going to keep talking about this as we go along, but I want people to have a visceral understanding of what integration is. I don't want it to just be some kind of intellectual understanding. So I'm trying video by video to get a baseline of this. And then with time, we can start talking more about this. So thanks for listening today.